Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I will tell you the whole stories about BMS code and also touch a bit about breastfeeding. Sorry if many of you have already listened to this story for many times. As I mentioned, WHO and Unicef recommend that all children should be exclusively breastfed to 6 months and continue breastfeeding to 2 years or beyond. Next slide, please. This recommendation was drawn based on the robust evidence of the benefit of breastfeeding. As you already know that a breast milk provides nutritious food for infants and young children, and it is the most appropriate food for their growth and development. Also, the breast milk provide immune to protect infants and young children from infectious related disease such as pneumonia and diarrhea. So the infant that was breastfed will have low chance to die in an early age. It has an estimate. There is an estimation that if we can improve the breastfeeding practice for all over the world, like 90% of mothers all around the world can exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months, we can save more lives, like 820,000 lives per year. And the situation of inadequate breastfeeding around the world now, it leads to a global economic loss around 300 billion US dollar per year. Next slide, please. So it seems that every mother should breastfeed their children, and also it is a natural process. But in reality, not every mother can do it because successful breastfeeding is relied on multifactorial determinants like individual determinants, maternal characteristic, and also mother-infant relationships also leads to some breastfeeding problems uh, that prevent mothers to do breastfeeding appropriately. Also, the support from health system, families, like one group mentioned about family members and consumers, and also the workplace and employment plays vital roles in supporting and promoting breastfeeding. Even the structural determinants like social cultural norms, like Thai mothers, oh no, sorry, like grandmothers in Thailand, they prefer to feed water for infants aged less than 6 months. The social norm like this can shape the breastfeeding practice and also the successful breastfeeding outcomes. Market contexts like BMS strategic promotions also shape the consumer perception and their decision to use BMS instead of breast milk. Next slide, please. WHO has set the global target, which align with the SDG target. By 2030, they expect that 70% of babies under 6 months old around the world will be exclusively breastfed, but the current situation is not so good. Only 41% of baby age during 6 months can have been exclusively breastfed during the first 6 months in 2019. And it seems like the global situation is far from the target, and we cannot achieve unless we put more effort to promote some effective interventions. Next slide, please. I just want to tell you the history of infant formula marketing a little bit. Infant formula that we are very used to it was firstly invented in 1860 by the chemist, one of the chemists. His purpose in inventing the formula was to save life of many children who have no mothers and they have no breast milk to be fed. But after the success investment of the infant formula, Henry Nestle invented Nestle Milk Food and established his company. Sorry. And infant food was was expands to be manufacturing products, and they aims to promote their sales and their profits. They try to make trust among consumers by engage medical association and health professional in their images and their brand royalties. So mothers tend to use BMS instead of breast milk during that era. And in 1960, the statistics show increased infant mortality rate for those bottle-fed formula. It could be linked with like poor sanitations, like poor quality of water that has to be used when you use infant formula. However, this situation leads to an increased expenditure of infant formula for family members, as well as the health expenditure for the countries that the majority of mothers use infant formula. So in 1980s, it is the beginning of the global fight for protecting breastfeeding and a global call for recall breastfeeding as a natural choice or natural main choice for infant feeding. And then BMS code was adopted in 1981. Next slide, please. I would like to show you some examples of leaflet or advertisement that was broadcast in Thailand in the past. You will see that there is an image of health professional in the documents. Next slide, please. And also the advertisement of infant formula, they always try to persuade consumers to believe that the baby that were fed by formula can have a normal growth and good development, like they use the smile pictures of the baby. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the global fight was evident in the WHO documents. Um, look back at 1974, the WHO noted the general decline in global breastfeeding rate. And then in 1978, the WHO recommend member states to prioritize the regulation of inappropriate sales promotion of infant foods, which led to the joint meeting in 1979 by the WHO and Unicef. They invite public organizations and member states, NGO, infant food industries, and also experts in marketing science and health science to join the meeting. Next slide, please. And they come up with some recommendations. The recommendation from joint meeting of WHO and UNICEF was endorsed in the WHO 33rd, and the World Assembly called for the development of international code to provide guidance to member states to control the promotion of breast milk substitute. The call at 1980s led to the drafting process for 1.5 years before the WHO 34th in 1981 adopt the WHO resolution 34.22 by voting system. The WHO prepared the code in 4 revised drafts, and the final draft was said that the WHO recommend member states to use this intervention rather than the WHO urge member states to use this as regulation. So finally, in 1981, the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitute was adopted in World Assembly. But to adopt the code is not easy because there were many stakeholders that have interest and power to tone up and tone down the code. Next slide, please. Normally, the WHO will seek for consensus for any health topics or any discussion. But for the code, the adoption cannot find consensus. So finally, the WHO used the voting system, and there were 118 countries vote in favor to adopt the code, but one country vote against the code. while 3 countries abstained from the vote. Yeah. Next slide, please. So in summary, the BMS code is like a recommendation, the global recommendation that WHO and member states and other stakeholders developed to provide guidance to countries to control the marketing promotion of BMS. However, at the beginning, it was present as recommendation, but after 30 years of implementation, it shows that recommendation is not effective enough. So there are the call to strengthen the code to be like regulative measures. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, Thailand is one of the countries that advocate for the strengthening of the BMS code to be not only the recommendations but should be a regulations, because Thailand adopt the code from 1981 into a national level voluntary code in 3 versions. But because it's just the recommendations, many industry violate the codes and they got no punishment. So it seems like we have no tools to protect mothers and families in receiving information about BMS. Next slide, please. And as a result, our breastfeeding rate was the lowest among countries in Southeast Asia region. In 2005, only 5% of mothers exclusive breastfeed their children to 6 months, which is very low, and it led to many consequences in terms of health and economic loss. Next slide, please. So in WHA 2010, Thai delegates made intervention to ask for the strengthening of the code from the recommendation to regulations. And the resolution from WHA this year said that WHA urged member states to develop and strengthen legislative and regulative measures to control the marketing of breast milk substitute. The resolution from WHO is called as a small success for Thailand, and then we bring this resolution back to our country. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We proposed one agenda to Thai National Health Assembly สช นะคะ in 2010 by applying the resolution from WHA 2010 that asks for the national legislative measures to control the marketing of BMS. After the working committee proposed this agenda in National Health Assembly, the National Health Assembly adopt this resolution and asked the MOPH to develop national legislative measures to control the marketing of BMS. And also they asked for the study of the maternity leave extension from 90 days to 180 days. Next slide, please. After we got the National Health Assembly resolutions, the Cabinet approved and ordered Ministry of Public Health to implement the resolution. So the drafting group and drafting process was established since 2012, and it took around 4 years until it got the first draft to disseminate to the public. And in 2016, the Cabinet allowed the Ministry of Public Health to submit the draft law to the Office of the Council of the State, which means กฤษฎีกา นะคะ However, during these 4 years, there are a lot of arguments and a lot of oppositions towards the draft. Some stakeholders might say this draft is bullish. Some stakeholders might say this draft limit the freedom of the families and the children. However, the Office of the Council of the State, they ask for more evidence to support the legitimacy of the draft law. why Thailand needs the law to control the marketing promotion of the product for children aged 0 to 3 years. And then Thailand took the advantage of WHA 2016 again to seek for advice and evidence. Next slide, please. Thai delegates who joined WHA 69 in 2016, they play a vital role to advocate for the adoption of one agenda, maternal, infant, and young child nutrition resolution, which call for the adoption of the draft guidance on ending the appropriate promotion of foods for infant and young children. This guidance draft by WHO and other member states was so important to, to, to Thailand because it can be used to back up our draft law, why we have to have this law and why this law have to control the promotion and marketing of BMS for infants and young children. Next slide, please. However, to successfully get this draft resolution is not enough because in World Health Assembly, there were, I have to say, there were a big fight between two groups of member states. Dr. Valaipon, Dr. Thapsapon, Dr. Varisam may help me add up details later about this fight. I was taking maternity leave at that time, but my husband joined, and he is a focal point to fight for this agenda. Because many countries are the main exporter of infant formulas, so they don't want to adopt this guidance. But the country like Thailand that have very low rate of exclusive breastfeeding eagerly to have this resolution, and we would like to use the resolution to back up our legislative process. You can see that before the meeting start, before World Health Assembly start, there are many rounds of consultations about the words written in the OP. Like the draft was said, this resolution will endorse the guidance, and the guidance have to be has several recommendations for member state. But finally, after the meeting finished, the word endorse was reject, and then the word welcome with appreciation, which is proposed by Japanese delegates, was used instead. Next slide, please. And this guidance helped us a lot, though it was toned down by the discussion during WHA. But it can clarify the scope of BMS to include a meal formula for young children aged 2 to 3 years. And it calls for the end of cross-promotion and sponsorship for health professionals. You can see Dr. Virot have to call for a group meeting during the drafting group because the discussion go wider and there cannot be consensus. Next slide, please. So finally, we got the guidance, and then we brought the guidance back home to back up with the Office of the Council of the State to explain why we need this law and why the scope of the law needs to be control the products for young children. Next slide, please. And finally, the draft law has been approved by the National Legislative Assembly in 2017. But you can see that the law is aimed to protect the right of the child to have opportunity to be breastfed, but still in the National Legislative Assembly, there are 3 people abstain for voting in favor of the law. But finally, it was enacted in September 2017. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of stakeholders at national level, all of stakeholders that you already mentioned are engaged in the process of legislations. However, like MOPH, the focal point of this law or this topic is Department of Health, because Department of Health are responsible for the health promotion and also breastfeeding. In terms of other ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also Ministry of Agriculture also play a vital role in provide comments and coordinate with others international partners, because Ministry of Foreign Affairs have to deal with like country that's oppose the law, the drafting process of Thailand, like US or EU. And the lawyer was also an important group of person, because the lawyer have to help in um, how can I say, polish the draft law to be more clearer and to be more effective when it has to be implemented. Industry, for sure, they have full interest and full power to mobilize, tone up and tone down the bill. So they engage in every steps of the legislative process. NGO also play a vital roles. NGO can cover like influential persons, celebrities, or medias. This picture shows the core team who is the one who consider the draft at the final stage at National Health Assembly, which include all stakeholders that I have been mentioned. Next slide, please. This is the photo show the process. You can see that we have to ask for celebrities and a group of mothers to call for their rights. If they kept silence, the draft law may be toned down more than this. And also, one of the most influential person called Drama Addict in Facebook, he is the one who kept monitoring the process and try to advocate to the public about the importance of the draft and why Thailand needs the law. Next slide, please. Health professional is very surprised at that time, because this law was opposed by some group of health professionals and also Thai medical associations, because they have some concerns about limitations of freedom of mother and families in receiving information about breast milk substitutes. The MOPH have to convene many meetings with health professionals only to explain the details of the draft and the reason why we need this law. Next slide, please. But the opinions among health professionals seems to be different between doctors, nurse, or dentists, or other types of health professionals. Next slide, please. And also WHO, Unicef, United Nations also play important role in advocate for the legislative process at national level. WHO and Unicef sent a formal letter to Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and also the Minister of Public Health to support the legislative process of the draft law. Next slide, please. However, the BMS industry, which everyone say that they have full interest, there seems not to be loudly advocate, or I have to say, there seems to be quiet more than we expected. They always express their sincerely attitude in the news or in the media that they are willing to follow the regulations that will implement by the governments, but sometimes they made some lobbying with others important stakeholders without behind us. And also the business council from international level also play vital roles in negotiating with royal Thai governments about this topic. Next slide, please. You already mentioned the WHO, but Another one who has very important role is UNICEF. UNICEF is like they provide close support for the working group and for the Royal Thai government. Also, the World Trade Organization, Thai team have to declare our intention in legislate the law to World Trade Organization, and we have to explain to many member states and provide them evidence why we need this law, because they claim that our law will restrict their imports and it will be a trade barriers in the futures. Okay,ค่ะ. Next slide, please. Okay, I will end here, and if you have any question, please feel free to ask me. Thank you,ค่ะ.